In 1921, the wealthiest black community in American history, a place with hospitals, law firms, luxury hotels, and self-made millionaires, was wiped completely off the map in just 16 hours. Not by an enemy nation, not by a natural disaster, by its own government. And for nearly 80 years, nobody was allowed to talk about it. To understand what was destroyed, you first have to understand what was built. In the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Americans had constructed something the world had never quite seen before. By 1921, Greenwood was home to 5 hotels, 31 restaurants, 4 drugstores, 8 doctors' offices, a hospital, 12 churches, law offices, a school, and multiple grocery stores. All Black-owned, all Black-operated. Black professionals, doctors, dentists, lawyers, and clergy, all served the community from within. Greenwood residents selected their own leaders and raised their own capital. This wasn't charity. This wasn't luck. Greenwood thrived as an anchored economy that kept money circulating entirely within the community. Even those who worked outside the district returned every dollar they earned back into Greenwood. The discovery of oil in the early 1900s on land previously considered worthless had made both Native Americans and African Americans extraordinarily wealthy. That oil money flowed into Greenwood, funding its hospitals, its newspapers, its theaters. Booker T. Washington called it the Negro Wall Street. History would come to call it Black Wall Street, and it terrified people. But while Greenwood was rising, the world around it was getting darker. The Civil War, which had ended just 56 years earlier, was still in living memory. Civil rights for African Americans barely existed. The Ku Klux Klan was resurging, fueled in part by the 1915 film The Birth of a Nation. By the end of 1921, an estimated 3,200 of Tulsa's 72,000 residents were Klan members. World War I had just ended. Black veterans returned to Tulsa, having fought for a country that still refused to treat them as equal citizens. As they tried to re-enter the labor force, white resentment surged. Job competition was fierce. An economic slump in northeastern Oklahoma made everything worse. And then there was the sight across the railroad tracks. White people, some of them struggling economically, could look across the Frisco tracks and see Black people living in homes, driving cars, furnishing their houses with pianos, women wearing furs, all the trappings of economic success. The dissonance between what white supremacy told them should be and what actually was created a tension that needed only one spark. That spark came from a lie. May 30th, 1921, a Monday morning. A 19-year-old black shoeshine named Dick Rowland went inside the Drexel building to use the third-floor segregated restroom. The elevator operator was a 17-year-old white girl named Sarah Page. What happened next took less than 10 seconds. According to the 2001 Oklahoma Commission report, Rowland most likely tripped as he stepped onto the elevator, and as he tried to catch himself, he grabbed Page's arm. She screamed. A clerk in a nearby store called the police. That was it. That was the entire incident. Page herself told police that Rowland had merely grabbed her arm and that she would not be pressing charges. The police barely investigated, but the Tulsa Tribune didn't wait for facts. That afternoon, the newspaper published a front-page headline, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator." The article claimed Rowland had assaulted her, scratched her face, and torn her clothes. Every word fabricated. This was not accidental journalism. Portraying black men as criminal threats served the entire architecture of white supremacy. It maintained Jim Crow, it justified segregation, and it gave mobs a language to act on their violence without guilt. By the end of that day, a white mob was gathering outside the courthouse where Rowland was being held. They wanted to hang him. Years later, investigators discovered that the Tulsa Tribune had quietly removed that front-page story from its own bound volumes, erasing the very evidence that had started the massacre. The night of May 31st, 1921. Word spread through Greenwood that Dick Rowland was about to be lynched. A group of at least 25 armed black residents, many of them World War I veterans, still carrying their military weapons, marched to the courthouse to protect him. They were outnumbered and they knew it, but they came anyway. A scuffle broke out when a white mob member grabbed the weapon of a black veteran. A single shot rang out, and chaos consumed the city. What followed was not a riot, it was a military operation. The National Guard was dispatched. Local law enforcement and deputized white citizens swept through Greenwood, not to protect it, but to disarm, arrest, and remove its black residents, dragging them from their homes and marching them to internment camps. The move left the mob outnumbering the remaining black population 20-1. Then came the planes. Biplanes appeared over the Greenwood district, dropping fiery turpentine bombs onto the rooftops of homes and businesses, making this the first aerial bombing of an American city in United States history. Lawyer B.C. Franklin watched it happen from his office window. He later wrote, "I could see planes circling in midair. They grew in number and hummed, darted, and dipped low. I could hear something like hail falling upon the top of my office building. Down East Archer, I saw the old Midway Hotel on fire, burning from its top. And then another, and another, and another building began to burn from their top." A lawsuit later filed in Tulsa County directly alleged that an oil company furnished the planes at the request of city agents, and that a Tulsa police captain was aboard one of the aircraft dropping turpentine bombs onto the homes below. On the ground, Tulsa police officers were identified by eyewitnesses as personally setting fire to black homes, shooting residents, and stealing from businesses. Women were chased from their houses naked, some with babies in their arms, as gunfire rained down on them. Several black residents were tied to cars and dragged through the streets. The rampage lasted 16 hours. When the smoke cleared on June 1st, 1921, here is what remained. More than 1,400 homes and businesses burned to ash. Nearly 10,000 people left homeless overnight. 35 city blocks gone. Over 800 people treated for injuries. Historians now believe as many as 300 people were killed. The total property damage is estimated at over $200 million in today's dollars. More than 6,000 black Tulsans were held in internment camps at the convention hall and the fairgrounds, some detained for up to 8 days, and they could not be released without a white citizen vouching for them. In 2019, an archaeological survey team scanning Tulsa's Arkansas River discovered subterranean areas consistent with mass graves, meaning the true death toll may be far higher than any official record acknowledges. The bodies are still being searched for. Here is where the story gets even darker, because what happened on May 31st was monstrous, but what happened after was calculated. 2 weeks after the massacre, Tulsa Mayor T.D. Evans issued an official city report. In it, he stated, "Let the blame for this Negro uprising go right where it belongs, on those armed Negroes who started this trouble. The victims were blamed. The perpetrators walked free. Police archives about the massacre disappeared. State militia records vanished. The Tulsa Tribune erased its own front page. No public ceremonies were held. No memorials were built. No one was prosecuted, not a single person, for the murders, the arson, or the theft. And the silence held for generations." The Greenwood Massacre was not unique in this erasure. Post-Civil War massacres in New Orleans, Memphis, Wilmington, Atlanta, Elaine, and Rosewood were all similarly buried, scrubbed from history books, removed from school curricula, and lost to national memory. This was not oversight. This was policy. It was only in 2020, 99 years after the event, that the Greenwood Massacre officially became part of the Oklahoma school curriculum. 99 years. In 1997, 76 years after the massacre, Oklahoma finally formed a commission to investigate. The commission's 2001 report recommended $33 million in reparations to survivors and their descendants. The state legislature acknowledged the recommendation, and then did nothing. To this day, not a single survivor or descendant of the Tulsa Race Massacre has received government compensation. In 2020, survivors and their descendants filed a lawsuit, demanding not just financial reparations, but a criminal investigation. Their attorney described it plainly. People had posed for photographs in front of dead black bodies, proud, guns in hand, and they had done so knowing they had the full protection of the police, the sheriff, and the National Guard. The lawsuit is still working its way through the courts. The mass grave sites are still being excavated. The truth is still being assembled, piece by piece, a century too late. Here is what most people miss when they talk about Black Wall Street. They talk about the buildings, the businesses, the death toll. But what was really stolen was something harder to count. For years after the massacre, Black women in Tulsa would see white women walking down the street wearing their jewelry, looted from their homes before the fires were even set. And beyond the jewelry, beyond the buildings, what was stolen was proof. Proof that Black wealth was possible. Proof that Black self-determination worked. Proof that a community, given the chance to build on its own terms, could build something extraordinary. That proof was inconvenient, so it was burned. If Greenwood had been allowed to grow for another 50 years, what would the racial wealth gap in America look like today? We will never know, because someone decided we shouldn't. They burned the buildings. They buried the truth. They erased it from textbooks, from archives, from memory. But here is the one thing they could not destroy. It happened. It was real. And it proved, beyond any doubt, that it was possible. No one was ever prosecuted for the Tulsa Race Massacre. Survivors are still waiting for reparations. The mass graves have not yet been fully excavated.